All right, before we move on, let's save this file. So we're going to do a file, save as, and we're going to name it with your name and then travel app. Again, no spaces, and we're putting that in the lesson 10 file. And once my very slow computer catches up, and I don't have to hit pause for the 700th time today, there we go. We're just going to say OK to the defaults. And I want you to come over to your side panel and click on Layers. And notice that this is called Layer 1. And when we twirl it open, we have an image, some groups. We have more groups with paths and rectangles. We have some text. And basically nothing is named in a way that we would not want to be given this file and told to work with it. We'd be guessing and trying to identify every single layer. So what we're doing in this chapter is kind of backwards. We're starting with a finished file with everything on layer 1, and we're going to clean it up. We're going to use subfolders. We're going to create more layers and sublayers, which look like folders and subfolders, and we're going to rename things that exist here already. As you know, the stacking order of the layers affects what you see and what you don't see. And the first thing drawn is always at the bottom. The second thing drawn is second to the bottom, and so on. So we need to organize this. Obviously, when you make a file from scratch on your own, you are naming them and organizing them as you go, so it makes more sense than this mess that we're in right now. I'm just going to show you what the finished product looks like. And you're going to see that we indeed have two main layers, well actually three, but the phone body has nothing but that. We have all the elements that are on the phone in this layer, including navigation, phone content, descriptions, and footers. And in the navigation copy layer, we have two groups and a rectangle. And this is much more organized and better named than the first one that we saw. So we're going to get to this point in a minute. Well, in a few minutes. So first thing that we want to do is make sure our layers tab is open and we can see that we do have layer 1. So within this layers tab, I'm actually going to show you the finished product again. We have a lot of things that are going to help us. The color of the layer. So if we select something and it lights up with red bounding boxes, we can know that it's in the red layer. If it has a yellow bounding box, it's in this phone layer. If it has a green bounding box, it's specifically in this phone content layer. So that can be very helpful. We also see the visibility icon, which allows us to turn on and off the visibility of the layer just by toggling it. We have potentially a template icon. It's not turned on yet, but we will see that later. We can also lock layers by clicking in the padlock. When something is locked, we can't accidentally select it or edit it. All right, we also have a menu up at the top right that allows us some details within this layer menu. We can do a new layer, a new sublayer. We can duplicate or delete something that we have highlighted. We can make a clipping mask, enter isolation mode, flatten our artwork, release to layers, template, etc. So there's a lot of different options up in that window. All right, we also have the targeted column, and that's just this whole thing on the right here. And then the selection column is the little circle to the right. So if I were to click on this item, it would show me that this is now targeted and selected. It's in a green layer and it's in the phone content, and this is the layer itself. We can kind of tell from this little thumbnail, but it's a lot easier to see when it's highlighted on the board. So you can target things by clicking on this area. So the selected art is over here, and then we can do things with appearances in this circle column, and more on that later. So without getting too confusing, let's jump into this. I'm just closing that finished document that I had open. So we're going to move forward on our original file called Your Name Travel App. Back in our working file in the layers column, if you twirl open this layer 1, you'll see that each object that you create under here is going to be listed. And groups show up as the word group, which is helpful. Paths show up as paths, rectangles as rectangles. So we are going to hide the content of layer 1 right now. And in the layers panel, we're going to double click directly on this thing called layer 1 to edit the layer name, and we're going to rename it phone body. So type that in and hit return. We're now going to create a new layer, and you saw that it did exist up here in this menu, but I want you to know that there's some shortcut buttons at the bottom of the layers panel as well. So create a new sublayer or create a new layer is just the plus sign. So go ahead and click on the create a new layer. And we end up getting layer 2 stacked above it, which is what we expect. So we need to now double click on the white layer thumbnail to the left of the name layer 2 or to the right of the word. So we can double click here or here. And that's going to open up a floating panel. And instead of just naming it like we did with phone body, we just clicked on the words to rename it. This gives us a few more options. So we're going to change this name to be navigation. And note that everything we do on this layer is going to be in red. But also note that you have some other options in here. We have a template, a lock. We could lock this layer right away. We do want it to show and print and preview, and you could change the dimming the images here. So by renaming it in this double-click layers option pop-up window, we have even more options to change. All right, so we're just going to say OK to that. And then we're going to go down to our new layer button down at the bottom of the layers panel. And we're going to click on option when we click on that. So we're going to come down here, but instead of clicking, we're going to hold the option button and then click. This did two things at once. Not only did it make a layer 3, it also popped open the same window or floating panel that we saw before. So it just saved you a step. Again, this one's going to be color-coded in green, and we just want to change the name of this one to phone content. Oops, I got to type better than that. Phone content, and then click OK. So we added 2 new layers by clicking the plus sign and then double-clicking to get our options, or by option clicking on this Create New Layer button to get to this point. Next up are sublayers, and you can think of sublayers as subfolders within these layers. Essentially, they're nested layers within a layer. These can be really useful for organizing content within a layer without having to group or ungroup the content. Next, we're going to create a sublayer, and we're going to put the footer content in this sublayer or subfolder so that we can keep all the footer content together. Let's make sure that the layer called phone content is the one that is highlighted and therefore selected. And then we're going to come down and we're going to choose this first option, the little arrow next to the plus sign, and that is create a new sublayer. And click on that, and we had a new sublayer pop up. And in my case, that was the 4th thing I did, so it was automatically named layer 4. But that's not a good way. We need to use proper names. Think logically so that not only you can work with this file later, but so could a coworker or someone else. We're going to change this to be footer and hit return. Then we're just going to close up this phone content. We don't need to see all the content, so we're going to twirl this disclosure triangle shut to keep our page nice and clean. So in a little bit ahead, we're going to be adding content to that footer sublayer.